Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sunday Surefire podcast. I'm your host, the Commish. I'm flying solo today. We will not be joined by Aaron Downtown Brown or Ethan Weaver tonight, but I am coming at you here with some early off-season Dynasty sell candidates. And in particular, these are going to be some high-profile sell high candidates. Definitely guys that have been very fantasy relevant, at least this year, if not for several years in the past. And I'm just thinking it might be time to at least put these guys on the trade block and just see what you can go ahead and get for these guys, folks. And before we get started, just if you like what you hear here, or if you followed us before, liked our videos and all that stuff, we appreciate it. Please go ahead and hit that follow button as well. Make sure you're subscribed on all of our social media platforms too. We're on X at Sunday_Surefire, and right here on YouTube at Sunday Surefire, and on Instagram at Sunday Surefire as well. But without any further ado, let's get this going here. My first high profile sell candidate of the offseason is Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. Finished the year as a half PPR RB13 overall, finished RB9 on a points per game basis in half point scoring formats. And look, Mixon's first season in Houston was definitely a productive one. I'm just a little bit skeptical that he's going to be able to duplicate it, guys. He got off to a really hot start, faded a little bit down the stretch, averaging just 5.9 half PPR fantasy points per game over the season's final four contests. And the real problem for me in Dynasty here, this is probably no shock, is going to be his age and his workload that he's accumulated throughout his NFL career. In 2025, Mixon will be age 29, and we know what happens as running backs creep up into their late 20s, and certainly when they hit 30, the wheels can tend to fall off, particularly for the high usage backs in a lot of cases. Mixon is going to enter next season with just over 2,300 touches on his frame so far in his career. And I've just seen this movie too many times, guys, where you hang on to a big name at the running back position. They're an aging guy. Those miles they start to creep up, and then guys break down quickly. Not everybody can be Derrick Henry where they're smashing thousands and thousands of yards out into their early 30s. And I just really just a case where I want to get out a little bit too soon rather than a year too late on Joe Mixon. You just know what the value does with those guys, those aging running backs. Once things start to go wrong for them, they go wrong in a hurry. But definitely not a guy you should be giving up on for nothing necessarily. So a couple of different trade ideas here. If you're a rebuilding team in a dynasty format, what I'm looking for is a late first round pick in this upcoming draft. Might be tough to get that considering it is considered a relatively high profile running back draft, and there is a lot of good players in the class, but you never know. There's tons of managers in leagues that they don't necessarily like draft picks. Maybe they don't do their rookie draft homework as much as you do. Someone like you who's listening to a podcast in January. Those managers are in leagues. So that's one of the things I'm looking for. Maybe at draft time, if it's early second round pick that I can get, it's a guy that I really like that falls to me. Maybe I've considered making that type of deal as well. I definitely unload him for any 2026 first round pick. Might be a sneaky angle where you can play if you're willing to wait one extra year to get a draft pick for someone like Joe Mixon. Maybe you trade him to a contender and that Mixon helps that manager this season. But maybe he doesn't. Maybe if he falls off, then maybe that pick ends up being a little bit earlier than you thought, and all of a sudden you waited a year. Maybe you're getting a mid-round 2026 first-round pick in a different class. And my other thought for a rebuilding team here is maybe swap him out for a wide receiver. Maybe try to package him together with another asset, something like Mixon in a second-round pick for like a Jaden Waddle or a DK Metcalf or DJ Moore, who just got a little bit of a bump in the head coaching department with Ben Johnson coming to town. Something sort of like that, where I'm just kind of pivoting away to a safer asset, a younger wide receiver with a little bit longer of a track record who can ideally produce for a greater period of time. And if you're a contending team and you're holding on to Joe Mixon, this is where it can be kind of tough, where if you need that production in your lineup, totally get it. So if I'm selling Mixon as a contender, I'm not going to do it for an early second or a late first. What I'm trying to do most likely here is buy back some years, meaning I take Joe Mixon and I tag on a little bit of a sweetener to go get a little bit younger at running back. Again, maybe try Mixon in a second and maybe multiple seconds for someone like a Kenneth Walker or a James Cook. Maybe if it's a late first even, maybe hang on and see how the class pans out, see how you like the end of the first round, and closer to your draft, if you like that, maybe you circle back and you go ahead and buy those 3, 4, 5 years of running back production left that those younger guys have. See if you can go ahead and get that done. The next player I want to talk about here is Terry McLaurin, half PPR, WR6 overall, and WR15 on a points per game basis in half point formats. Honestly, this one feels a little bit unfair because we've been saying for years in Dynasty that all Terry needs to really cook is a QB upgrade. Just give this guy above average quarterback play and he'll be great. And he got it this year with Jay Daniels, finally got it. And he returned his first WR1 season. So good on him. I like Terry as a problem, but again, kind of like Mixon, the age is what's kind of scaring me with McLaurin. He's a little bit older than you think he is. He's been around for a little while, but he's already turning 30 at the beginning of 2025. He'll be 30 in September. So when the season kicks off, he'll be 30 within a week or so. So I consider that his age 30 campaign. And I played Dynasty long enough to know what happens to these guys' values here. You always got to be value conscious in Dynasty for these aging players. I mean, the second anything bad happens to one of these players that's on the wrong side of 30, if he gets hurt for any length of time, it's an immediate value hit. If he has a bad stretch of games that he's going through, immediate value hit. The second we hit the offseason and we're not chasing points anymore, that's another immediate value hit for a 30-year-old player, which Terry McLaurin will be next offseason. So I like to be thinking ahead, kind of take a proactive approach with my players that are starting to age out in Dynasty. I'm one of the biggest Dynasty agists out there. So that's why McLaurin falls into this bucket for me. And the other thing I'm kind of concerned about here, and not a lot of people are talking about, is what the Commanders decide to do this offseason. At the moment, they're currently sitting on the third most available cap space in what's going to be a good free agent wide receiver class. So if this new ownership group decides to really, really take advantage of Jane Daniels' rookie contract and spend some money, there's a real chance they could bring in a high-profile wide receiver to complement Terry McLaurin, and we can have that discussion of whether that helps him or hurts him, takes coverage away, but also could take some targets away. We're not really sure exactly how it's going to pan out or if that's going to happen. That's probably a down-the-road conversation. It's just something that I have in the back of my head where, McLaurin finally has the quarterback play, but he's also had the wide receiver room to himself for the majority of his career in Washington. And I'm not sure that's going to continue to be the case if Washington really decides to spend that money. But again, like this player a lot, definitely not pivoting away from him for nothing. I want to make sure I get the most I make bang for my buck if I am going to go ahead and trade Terry McLaurin. So looking at some targets for him, if I'm a contending team, I'm absolutely going to need, if I really need that WR1 production, and maybe my league's a little bit stingy when it comes to trading top wide receivers, then you're probably not going to move Terry if I'm being honest with you. And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with a contending team keeping Terry McLaurin. If you want to say I want him on my team for 2025 because I'm trying to win a championship, again, no problem. That's fine. But if you are going to look to move on from him as a contender, what I'm trying to do is get younger at wide receiver, sort of like I was saying earlier, buying back those years of production. And I know the Jeffersons, the Shamar Chases, the CeeDee Lambs, those guys in your leagues, they're not going to come cheap. I get it. They're probably going to be too expensive for a 30-year-old player like McLaurin. You probably have to add too many pieces to that deal to make it worth your while. So what I'm targeting is that next year, guys like Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown. And it's still going to probably cost you a solid asset coming out the door with Terry McLaurin to go ahead and make that upgrade. But if we're talking about your team as a contender and you're a late first-round pick or maybe even a 2026 first-round pick, and you're adding that to McLaurin for one of those players, I think that's a worthwhile investment to go ahead and do that because they are, 2, 3, 4, in some cases 5 years younger. If you're I think it's sort of a good little cluster where I can just go ahead and get that upgrade at wide receiver and feel good about that player in my lineup for a few more years longer than McLaurin is going to last in all likelihood. And if I'm a rebuilding team and I'm moving on from a guy like Lauren, it's an easier thing to do. I feel like just you're not going to be interested in winning games this year. So get that 30-year-old receiver off your team. And yeah, it's the right move. If I'm trading him for picks in this class, I'm aiming for a mid-2025 first. If I can go ahead and get that deal done, great. If it's a late first, I can get like an early second or a mid-second on top. I might consider that move a little bit closer to the draft as well, but I'm really trying to get a mid-first round pick for Terry if I'm moving on in a rebuild situation. This last player here might be a little bit more controversial that I want to talk about because he's not an aging player. It's Ladd McConkey, coming off a really good rookie season, went over 1,000 yards with the Chargers. He was the half PPR WR18 on both a points per game basis as well as an overall scoring in that format, and just 24 years old. So that's entering. He'll be 24 entering the 2025 season. So he's got nothing but time on his side. Definitely not an age thing in this case. In fact, this is just a pure example of a player that I'm only selling if the value I'm getting is great. Another guy where I'm not trying to just punt this guy off my team for a market value. I need to do better than that for sure if I'm going to trade a guy like Ladd. And there's plenty of things that you can point to in negotiations with your league mates for the good things that Ladd produced in 2025. For one, he's Justin Herbert's top target, and right now there's not another guy who can even question that. Going out, if you want to look at the analytics side of things here, he finished as Pro Football Focus's 13th graded wide receiver on the year, and he finished WR 11 in points per game over the season's final 8 weeks. So the last thing people saw him was scoring points in their fantasy teams, and if they tuned into that playoff game, they saw him go nuclear against Houston, kind of the only bright spot for the Chargers in that game. And people in Dynasty and in life in general, really, tend to really gravitate towards the last thing they saw. The most recent thing that they witnessed is kind of that lasting impression, especially in football where we have a long offseason. So people are going to think pretty highly of Ladd. He's probably going to be a top 15 receiver in most people's uh, books when it comes to Dynasty, and he'll be in my top 15 as well. I think he's a good player. I definitely don't want to trade him, but my concerns here are that, inevitably there's going to be some target competition added to this Chargers offense. I mean, we know that they can't just roll Quentin Johnston out there and just the veteran room of tight ends they had last year. Eventually, that's going to be addressed. I think maybe even they go with Colston Loveland or Ty Warren in this upcoming draft, and they address it that way, and they're adding target competition, someone who also could play sort of closer to the line of scrimmage or closer to the offensive line from a snap percentage. We saw Ladd occupy that inside role this year, playing 65% of his snaps in the slot. So they could add a tight end who might eat into some of that volume. There's definitely room for a guy on the perimeter. Again, sorry, QJ. We need a reliable guy out there. He's not this regime's guy, so I could see them definitely making a move at wide receiver, maybe getting one of those bigger body guys outside. But either way, I think whether it's a tight end or a fellow wide receiver, I think that there could be more competition for Ladd going forward. Where, as far as production goes, he might not be a guy that ever cracks the top 7 or 8 wide receivers, and he's kind of just one of those players who's on the fringe of WR1, WR2, which again is totally fine, especially for a younger player. So again, if I'm only moving him, if return is going to be a big one coming back to me. And for a contending team, if I'm going to go ahead and sell Ladd McConkey, in an ideal world, I'm going to use him to go ahead and just do more of the same, to upgrade to one of those guys in the top 6 wide receiver or so. Someone, a guy like a Puka Nacua or an Amon-Ra St. Brown. And if I want to do that, I think I could just give me a little bit more ceiling from week to week versus Ladd's, I think, going to be a really high floor player. What those other guys can be as well, but I think the ceiling's a little bit higher for someone like Puka or St. Brown, and they're both young. All these guys are young, so that's kind of a wash on that front. For a rebuilding team here, I'm looking for 2 first-round picks in the 2025 draft. If I'm going to entertain moving Ladd McConkey, ideally both of them being mid-first-round picks, where I think that's a fair ask, at least for people that if they saw Ladd and they thought he performed really well as a rookie, if they want to get a shares of him, make them paid to do so. And if it's maybe even a mid first round pick this year and a 2026 first could be enough if you think the manager that the 26 first is assigned to is a team that has the potential of being a bad team in 2025. So you're kind of just projecting out a year thinking like, okay, this team thinks that they can compete if they make this move. I kind of know that they can't. So I'll take their 106 this year and I'll bank their 2026 first. And I'm really going to be hopeful that's a top 3 pick in 2026. Now, all of a sudden, you've taken a really good asset in Ladd McConkey, and you're getting a kick at the can this year at one of the top backs in this class, maybe a quarterback if you're in a super flex league, or one of the top wideouts in this class after Ted McMillan. Then you get a shot there, and you get a shot in an early pick in 2026. So rebuilding teams are all about scarfing up that value, and a lot of times 2-for-1s or 3-for-2s are the ways to go. So that's how I like to attack my rebuilds anyway. Go ahead and get as much value as I can. That's what I have for you folks here. A quick hitter here, just some high-profile sell candidates. Again, do not give away any of these players that I mentioned. I like them all, but at some point you gotta make some moves out there if you want to keep your dynasty team current. And sometimes just taking the right value is the way to go in dynasty. You can't go wrong if you do that. But that's what we got, folks. Again, make sure you're hitting the like button, hitting that follow button, and until next time, peace.